Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whenever you guys are tuning in from. I see that we have a really large international community. I am Jocelyn, your Power Platform Connectors Product Manager, and today is March 8th. Welcome back to the Labs call. Oh, awesome. I see that people have joined from the boot camp. Thank you so much for coming. Today we have an awesome agenda set up for you. I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to make a custom connector and demoing a really awesome connector that if you guys are from the bootcamp, you may have seen this demo already. I also will be giving you guys updates on connector count, and our featured guest for today is product manager Matt Townsend from the Power Automate Cloud Flows team, who is here to teach you guys about the Dataverse connector. Let's get into it. Just a quick intro of myself. I'm originally from the East Coast, born in Brooklyn and raised in New Jersey. I am a University of Washington, Seattle alumnus, and I used to work on the Cloudflows team as part of the Maker Experience, closer to Matt. Just to set the stage for what we are talking about today, I think it's important for us to just have an overview and understanding of the Power Platform Connector ecosystem as a whole. Predominantly, our connectors represent Power Apps, Power Automate, and Azure Logic apps. All connectors initially start off as custom connectors, which you can create yourself and deploy within an environment for your own personal use or for your enterprise use. And from there, you have the option to certify your connectors, which means making them part of the large quantity of shared connectors that are immediately usable for all users of the Power Platform as part of our out-of-the-box solutions. There are three main types of certified connectors. The first are first-party connectors, which are Microsoft-owned and created. Predominantly, they are Microsoft-owned APIs like SharePoint, Office, Outlook, Excel. There are also some first-party connectors that Microsoft made originally in the creation of our ecosystem, including external APIs like LinkedIn and Twitter and Google Drive, other rich use case scenarios that we just picked up on our own. The second are third-party verified publishers. So these are external API owners, predominantly enterprises, that are leveraging the APIs that they own themselves in order to create these connectors. Some of our big examples include DocuSign, Adobe, Autodesk, SurveyMonkey. And these are not necessarily going to just be made by community members, which it brings us to our last type, independent publisher connectors. Independent publisher connectors are created by community members, individuals, consultants, community devs, citizen devs, anyone who is leveraging open sourced APIs. So that means it's not necessarily the owner of the API themselves. And there are a lot of fantastic use cases created from independent publisher connectors. Some of them include Snowflakes, Yelp. We have, of course, OpenAI, which I'm sure you guys have heard of by now, as well as a bunch more, Discord, Spotify, HubSpot. These are all some great examples of how open source code has been leveraged by the community in order to create these connectors. Just an update on where we are from a month ago. I know it's been a short month, but a lot of changes have already happened. We are now at 969 total certified connectors across the ecosystem, which is 29 more than the last time we spoke. So it was only a 28-day month, so that's actually one additional one per day, which is really awesome. And that includes plus 15 more independent publisher ones, so 15 more that were made from the community. With regards to the total breakdown, we are actually now at more connectors created by independent publishers than we were at first party. So more community-made connectors than the ones that Microsoft has made itself. To start off, I figured I would go through how exactly to make a custom connector. We've talked a lot in this series about how to certify a connector, how to use a connector, and in case, just for a reminder, this series is indeed recorded and posted on YouTube. I am a little bit behind in my postings, I'm sorry. But a few months back, we actually had a talk with our certification PM, Amjad, who went through the process of how you can take your custom connector from just being deployed within its own environment to certify it so it's available for all users. But I realized we never actually had a formal conversation about how to initially start off creating that connector. And in the survey that you guys fill out in order to get an invite to this meeting, I ask you guys how many of you guys have created a custom connector within your own environment or made a connector that you're using for personal use. And that is actually, I'm pretty sure like the majority of you guys said that you have not used or made one yet. So I figured this would be a good lesson for us to cover. I can also then go and share again the link to the recording from Amjad talking about how the certification process happens so we can have a complete story. First, how do I make a connector? And then how do I certify it? So let's jump in. The first thing that we're going to talk about is how to make a Yelp custom connector. This demo was actually originally called From Something to Wow in 5 minutes. So basically, we're just going to say that it only takes 5 minutes to create something super duper impressive in the custom connector space. Let's start off with Yelp. Initially, we're able to retrieve the API that you're going to need immediately from the dev portal of Yelp's own website. Then we're able to go into the data tab on Power Automate's portal and create a custom connector from blank by clicking on custom connector, new custom connector, create from blank. After that, it's pretty simple. We can just name it. We can then go ahead and call this Yelp Bootcamp demo. For my person that came from the bootcamp, you'll recognize these recordings. We're able to give it a quick description. I can just go ahead and say that this is going to be the Yelp demo for these purposes. And I'll go ahead and paste that link to that original API as the host. After that, I'm able to move forward now indicating what authentication type we're going to be using. We're going to be using the API key, and we're able to label that parameter as the Yelp API as the authorization type that we need. And from here, we can move on to actually deciding what actions we're going to be using. So defining the purposes of this connector. So we're going to go ahead and click on a new action. Predominantly, I want this API to be able to search for businesses. So we're going to name it business search. And from here, this is very important. The verb that we're looking for is these are recordings for demo purposes, but thank you for noticing that. We're going to be getting this imported from sample by again calling that API from the dev portal website. We're going to ensure that our definitions are required. So you actually do have to fill in these terms to make sure that, we actually have a term that we're looking for. The term might be restaurant. And we also want to require a location. So we're not going to search for restaurants or search for businesses throughout the entire world. We're going to then go and make sure we call a default response. Again, this is pretty simple because our dev tools are able to give us a default response for what's going to be called when we leverage this connector immediately. You don't need to be some kind of dev wizard expert mode level in order to create a custom connector. Again, most of this is provided by the dev tools itself. And from here, we're almost done creating it already. Let's go ahead to the next slide. The last thing we want to do is ensure that our connection is valid. So we're going to go into our testing tab and click on Create Connection. We're able to go into our own portal for the dev tools and look for our API key. Copy that over and insert it here. Something important to note is that for this API authentication, type the word bearer first, because this is the specific type, and then insert our API key. We're going to test it, and it might take a second to refresh that our connection is valid. We'll click the little refresh token, and there we have it. There is our connection. It has been established. And now we can go and test it in a flow before we get anything super fancy or try to create an app. So I looked for restaurants in Manhattan, and I tested the operation to see that we did actually get a response in the response type that we were originally looking for. So I can see that there is a breakfast and brunch place, and those are the coordinates for it. Here's the address. Awesome. This was a success. The last thing that we did for this demo, just to again go from nothing to wow in 5 minutes, was we went and created a really quick app. So we went into Power Apps to create a blank canvas app, and we named it Yelp Demo. From here, we're going to create a blank app, and it'll take a second to load because Power Apps is a little slow sometimes. And we're able to start creating that connection again between the connector and our app now. And we're going to only be pulling from one data source. So it's important to know that in Power Apps, you can predominantly use a connector in two ways, either as a data source or as an action where you're actually pulling from a secret flow behind the scenes. We went to add data, and now we can see our Yelp Bootcamp demo connector is there as our data source. Perfect. From here, we're going to go and configure the inputs and the outputs. So what are we going to be searching for, and what is it going to return for us? We're going to go and add a text input as well as a button. And what that button is going to do is search. So we label it a search, and we make sure we set our results. So we can see that we're searching within the realm of Manhattan here. We're going to go and input a vertical gallery so that we're able to scroll through everything and configure that so it is connected to our connector. So we can go and say, we want this to be our result. Choose a result there. We're able to go and configure our image as well as the description of the restaurant. So here we'll say that this is where we're going to have the name of the restaurant be returned. This item.name, underneath perhaps this item.rating, so we can see how many stars this restaurant has. And last, just a little image. Give me a little picture of this restaurant here. Image underscore URL. And from here, our app is already about done. Now we're going to go and click F5, preview it, and search up restaurants. And again, we've hard-coded this parameter to be within the realm of Manhattan. And also, we have some results. We have some Mediterranean restaurants. We have a bunch of options. This was how quick it is for you to create a custom connector. We went from nothing, bare bones, to calling the Yelp API, being able to configure all of our parameters and all of our actions ourselves, to creating a functioning Power Apps in mere minutes. Oh, thank you. I see a clap. So, spoiler alert, you guys actually got to see a part of this demo last time if there are any returning faces, but it has been enhanced to be a lot cooler. So, was this cool? Yes, but can it get cooler? Last time, I was able to show you guys a few screen recordings of Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I've really worked to make sure that was a seamless process. Thank you. I showed you guys last time a really awesome demo created by an independent publisher, leveraging the OpenAI connector. And I actually was able to integrate that demo with the Yelp demo so we can see just how powerful two different connectors can be in a very similar use case. So let's get going. Let's see an even cooler demo. We're going to stick with the theme of looking for restaurants, right? Because that was how we were going to be leveraging our Yelp demo. So we have this ultimate data sample generator here, and we're looking for restaurants near Times Square. And we get a bunch of options. It just lists me some options. We have Olive Garden, we have TGI Fridays. I want to just get a description of that. Maybe I'm not super familiar with what Olive Garden is or something, so I can get a little description. What should I be expecting from this restaurant? Awesome. Now I get a little bit of description. It's an Italian-American restaurant chain. Perhaps I'm vegetarian and I want to know what meal options I have there. I can have vegetarian entrees served at asterisk. Asterisk referring to our original search parameter of restaurants near Times Square. Awesome, I got some examples, like plant parmesan, stuffed shells, marinara. These are some great examples of vegetarian options I can have at that original restaurant that we were calling. Got it, that makes sense. Maybe I want even more options. Maybe I want to know vegetarian appetizers served at, and I think I've decided I do want to go to Olive Garden. Let's give some data on vegetarian appetizers served at Olive Garden. We have bruschetta. I love bruschetta. I know what bruschetta is, but maybe I'm not familiar with some of these things. Okay, I can get a description of that as well. We know that bruschetta is an Italian appetizer with slices of toasted bread and tomatoes. Great. Thank you for that insight, Ultimate Sample Data Generator. We are also able to call for an image of bruschetta. Maybe I don't know what that looks like. Awesome. Thanks for giving me this information. I can also then go and say, Perhaps I have an allergy and I need to know more specifically what ingredients are being used in there." Again, we type for ingredients in asterisk, referring back to our original parameter of vegetarian appetizers. Now we get some ingredients, so we know what to expect as part of that appetizer. From here, I can then go and say that I think I've decided that I do want to go to Olive Garden, but perhaps I want to go to a different Olive Garden location than just the one near Times Square. I can then go and search Olive Garden locations in Manhattan. And I see the original Times Square one, but I can also find one in the Upper East Side, in Midtown. Maybe I didn't grow up on the East Coast and I'm not super familiar with these areas. So I can then go and ask for a description of this neighborhood, what to expect when I go to the Upper East Side. So a very important question then to ask, is there going to be parking in Manhattan? So I can ask for parking options at, and again, the asterisk will refer back to our original parameter of parking options at Olive Garden locations around Manhattan, which I think is super duper smart. And you guys already know the spoiler of what connector is being able to give us all of these informations. We know that this is the OpenAI connector, but the fact that this is able to actually give us all of this information with just one connector is super awesome. So say we want to find things to do more than just to eat. We are able to go and say, oh, here are some things to do. I can visit the Empire State Building. This part I thought was super impressive, where I'm able to ask for parking options at, but it's parking options at things to do. The fact that contextualizes the location of the thing to do is super impressive because it doesn't grammatically match up there at all. But again, I'm able to know that places to eat near a thing to do. So I can find food, I can find parking, and then I can go and ask for an image. What is it going to look like for me when I go to visit the Empire State Building? There's a little picture. What is it going to look like for me as I walk through Central Park? And I thought the walking through Central Park one was a really awesome image because it doesn't just show Central Park as a whole, that really famous zoomed out picture of overhead. It shows what it actually looks like as you're walking along the path of Central Park. And the last part that I wanted to call out was that this connector now supports DALL-E as well. So from here, I can then go into the action in Power Apps and say, okay, create image. I don't just want a picture of loop result. I want a picture of loop result while it's cloudy, because perhaps it's going to be cloudy when I'm going to visit these locations. We're going to regenerate the images, and it's going to give me back an image of this attraction of whatever I'm doing while it's cloudy. And these aren't just images that are necessarily just found online, like we're using some kind of Bing search connector here. These are images that OpenAI is going to be generated. So there is a little picture of somebody walking through Central Park while it's cloudy. And the next thing that we can do, of course, in the most stereotypical DALL-E demo fashion, is I can go in and say something like, I don't just want a picture of it while it's cloudy. I want you to go and give me an image of it in some other artistic fashion. So we're going to go into a picture of loop result while, going to delete that and say, as a watercolor, while it's raining, perhaps. We're going to have some Seattle weather in the East Coast. We're going to go back to F5 and regenerate our images. And now we will have to see our watercolor of the Empire State Building in the rain. Or our picture that we have our little guy over here with an umbrella on while he's walking through rainy Central Park. For those people that I presented this to initially the first time in the boot camp, I lied, and I didn't actually say that this was going to be the OpenAI connector. I used this demo as an opportunity to evangelize the OpenAI connector, as well as the opportunity to evangelize the independent publisher program, because it's really important to note that this fantastic use case was not necessarily created as an alliance between Power Platform and OpenAI themselves. This was created by an independent publisher who was just leveraging open source code. And what's really awesome is that anyone can do this. So I'm probably sure that Troy is here right now. Troy is our largest independent publisher contributor, and he's able to hop on this effort with Robin in order to enhance this connector even further. you can also go and create a connector about any other connector that we have not had yet. We have a long list of connector requests. Squarespace is on there. We don't have a really, really great Facebook connector as well. So what's most important to note is that creating something with as rich functionality as this OpenAI connector had is available and an opportunity for anyone. I will pause there for questions because that was a long demo with a lot of things going on. Feel free to unmute or put things in chat. Completely up to you guys. Hi, Troy.
Is there any kind of lab on this? A step-by-step written documentation on this?
Yes, absolutely there is. So we have lots of documentation step by step on how to create a custom connector. Happy to share these links in the chat once I hand it over to Matt, as well as step by step how to certify it. There's also a ton of videos using different connectors as the example on YouTube. Some with Low Code Revolution. Some of you guys might know Daniel Laskowitz. He's done a bunch of examples as well. Happy to share all of these.
I have a question, Jocelyn. We built a custom connector with DocuSign, which had to involved OAuth 2, and you then need a local login account to make all of that work. We're now trying to do ALM with it, and that's not very straightforward with a standard connector or a custom connector. Is there any great improvements coming for custom connectors when doing ALM? Between environments. Now, obviously, we're at our infancy stage. We're just taking it one step at a time. But we've noticed there's quite a lot of information out there which isn't exactly seamless. It's good, but it's not seamless. So that's what I'm after.
We do have planned enhancements in the ALM space for custom connectors on our roadmap, and we're aware that this is definitely a feedback. We also do have, and I'm not sure if this is in your realm so much, Chris, but Chris, the flow-specific ALM expert, is in this call as well. Chris, this is definitely more of a question for me and Samir, but do you have any additional insights?
Yeah, just you guys have you guys have a bunch of ALM improvements planned.
Yep.
We also have some ALM improvements planned. Jason, if you have specific challenges that you're interested in.
The big one is everybody says you can't put the custom connector in and do the ALM. It has to be done on its own and brought in first in a single solution on its own, because something has to happen in Azure. However, nobody actually says what that is, why it's important, and when you know it's actually happened. Those sort of things. But don't get me wrong. As I said, we're liking custom connectors, and we're about to start work with old legacy systems that we're looking to move onto the Power Platform one way or the other, just to get data moving again. So that's where we're interested in this. So any information on the Azure secret bit that might not be that secret, but you just don't tell anybody, useful.
Can I ask a quick question about your use case?
Yes.
I heard you mention that you were using DocuSign as a custom connector. Is there a reason you prefer using DocuSign as a custom connector rather than the DocuSign connector that's already been certified?
Yes, the reason we're having to use it is we did this in partnership with DocuSign for our bespoke application for what we did, and they said a custom connector is the best way of doing the things that we actually needed it to do. So we followed their lead and we did it their way. So that's the reason we picked the custom connector with DocuSign rather than the out-of-the-box DocuSign connector, because they had to use it.
When was this?
Oh God, no, this is at least a good 18 months ago, I think.
Okay.
So, and now we're at the point where we're now having to move our solution between environments as we're leveling up our environment strategy as well, you see. So, sorry for hogging this, Jocelyn.
No worries, no worries. I see a lot of questions for links, list of connectors that people want or think is interesting. I will drop that, as well as other information on how to certify your connector, or how to create a custom connector. I will share that as well. I see one more hand raised. Go ahead. I think your name is Ashok.
I must have accidentally hit that. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry.
No worries. Anything else that I can field? Going once, going twice. Okay, awesome. Then with that, I will send it over to, hold on. Matt Townsend with the overview and applications of the Dataverse connector. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Hey, folks, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Sweet. Let me share my slides here.
And Matt, feel free to take up as much of the time as you would like for this latter half.
Sure thing, sure thing. Yeah, looks like we have about 30 minutes left. Yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for all your interest in the platform and these awesome questions here. And Jocelyn, I have to say that I almost fell off my chair with that demo. That was so awesome to see the dolly pieces and everything tied into an awesome canvas app. So love that demo.
Thank
Looking forward
you.
to try out some of those custom connectors and pieces more myself. Yeah, so jumping in, I'm Matt Townsend from Atlanta, Georgia, sharing some content about the Dataverse connector today. This is meant as a quick overview, and feel free to chime in the chat as I go along. If this, with any questions on this content, this is meant as a quick primer for anyone less familiar with the Dataverse connector. Definitely for other more advanced questions or other advanced ALM type scenarios. We do want to put out more tutorials and things around that. So if you have any questions for those types of things, please let us know what you'd be most interested in seeing. And with that, let me jump right into our content. So just to share, Dataverse fitting in with our low-code platform. So you're used to seeing our other Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, Power Virtual Agents, and now Power Pages and other pieces, right? As a set of low-code tools that span all of Microsoft, right? Azure, Dynamics 365, M365, and other pieces, right? These tools make it possible to build things that connect these simple apps and complex business apps that meet your workflows, combine data from across all these different sources, and help make things more efficient. Underpinning Dynamics 365 and all of our low-code apps is Microsoft Dataverse as a way to support not just these apps, but your extensions on these apps. So you can store data, build custom apps with different, rich business logic and integrations right within this app. It is more than just a data store. It's helping you, build views, build rich interfaces around this data as well. And today we're going to talk about how you can interact with this data source and these other operations from Cloudflows and from Power Automate. So there's two major scenarios that we'll show just to kind of get a picture of how these pieces go together. And I'll also cover, if you don't have Dataverse, how to get started, how to try out some of these pieces. The major two areas here are, you can include flows in Dynamics 365 apps and model-driven Power Apps. We have a flow menu where it's easy to publish Cloud flows that it can be triggered from any one of these contexts, making it easy to embed Cloud flows within any workflows you've created from these apps, whether it's Dynamics customer service, sales, other pieces you're using, or if you've just built a standalone model-driven Power App or other pieces, and you want to easily trigger flows directly from that app, adding other shortcuts or things, just using Cloud flows right from that context. The other set of scenarios are using the connector to automate your back office processes and set up integrations that do work on your behalf behind the scenes using Cloudflows. So all of this is built around our natively integrated Power Automate Dataverse connector, which is built a little bit different than other connectors. It's directly connected to Dataverse, so it runs faster and makes it easier to. You'll see some of the ways that you can not just use your connection when you're running the flow, but users running the flow can share their connection, and when the flow is triggered, you can have it operate in the context of folks, other users changing those rows and tables in Dataverse, have this connector use their identity for other steps in the flow, and kind of maintain those pieces. It's easy to respond to any changes in your data sources. So Dataverse, of course, you can use the built-in tables in Dataverse. You can add any custom entities if you're tracking, custom products, types of inventory, custom processes, or any of those pieces. You can add custom entities in Dataverse and manage those events. You may have seen the last labs call where Nathan Helgren and our Dataverse team was sharing more about virtual tables in Dataverse and some of the new ways that those can be set up so that Dataverse can actually reflect any data source in SQL directly as a Dataverse entity. So if you're building Cloud Flows, building apps that all interact with Dataverse, you don't need to have connections to those other sources directly, handle all those mappings and things in multiple places. You can do it all from Dataverse, where you've brought in multiple other tables, multiple other things to the same place, and you can automate all from that one set of tables. And the last piece we'll see in the demo here is around querying, creating, updating data in flows. It's easy to interact with Dataverse and call other actions there from that context. Yeah, let me jump to some demo content. Any questions before I jump over to showing some of the interface and getting started pieces? Okay, switch my screen sharing here. Okay, can everyone see this window?
The Microsoft Learn documentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So just jumping right in, I did want to share this document up front for anyone who is diving into, whether you're at the beginning of your journey or diving into more advanced pieces. This documentation in this Power Platform adoption best practices area has a lot of great guidance around, spinning things up and scaling things up. So I wanted to call out this piece around environment strategy, just because, understanding which Dataverse environments you're using, and which context you're using the Dataverse connector from is really important as you get started. So just to share just a quick summary for anyone less familiar. In Dataverse, there's a default environment that's available by default within your organization's tenant. You can also create custom environments, and you may also have access to other environments that others have created or that are used as part of your apps. If your organization uses different Dynamics apps, has different, they may have one or more other environments tied to those other apps that they've already built. So when we talk about the Dataverse connector today, this Dataverse connector only operates within one of those environments. We're working on adding the ability for it to connect to other environments, making it easier to span those other pieces. So you can see here I'm working in my default environment. And if I were to go to the Power Platform Admin Center, that's admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, I can confirm which environments that I have access to manage, which ones that I can access. And by clicking into this one, you can see this underlying environment URL for this organization, which, as you'll see, can be handy to refer back to sometimes as you're building different integrations with this specific environment. So for anyone getting started with Dataverse, you can use this Power Platform Admin Center to check which environments you have access to, manage your user access. You need, by default, you need an administrator, system customizer. If you're doing more admin type tasks, you need, within this, you can make sure that your user or other users you're working with have the environment maker role to make sure that they can create and run Cloud Flows in this environment. Just to show that really quick, this is a demo user. Right now, this user has the basic user security role as well as environment maker. So I know this user would be able to work with Cloud Flows, use the Dataverse connector, all these other pieces. If you do not yet have a Dataverse environment, you can start a new trial for different pieces. You can start a Power Automate trial and get access to these pieces. If you have Microsoft Teams in your organization, you have access to Power Automate within context of Teams. And if you're using a Dataverse for Teams environment, it'll show up as type Dataverse for Teams here. The Dataverse connector is always available from Teams for that usage. For other environments, you do need a premium license to use the Dataverse connector, which means one of the per user Power Automate, Power Apps, or other licenses. But if you don't have one of those, you can start a 90-day trial just from powerautomate.com or through one of the other Dynamics trial experiences that I mentioned. Yeah, so let's say you've successfully signed in here, created an environment, you have a context, you're ready to get started. Here I'm showing the Power Apps Maker experience. But I also want to make sure folks have seen the Power Automate URL itself. This is changed recently to be make.powerautomate.com. So this is your hub for everything Power Automate. You can also reach it through the Power Apps pages, but sometimes this embedding doesn't load as fast, so sometimes it can be helpful to go directly here to Power Automate. So yeah, let's look at a sample app. Here, I've created a very basic model-driven Power App. And just to show the steps to get here, if you're following along in the recording, would be from, I have too many app tabs open here, creating a new blank app based on Dataverse. And you see here it says model-driven app. This is creating a new model-driven Power App that uses these same view components and things that are common across other Dynamics 365 apps and other Dataverse-backed apps. So I created one of these, I gave it a name, and I selected a table. For this demo app, I selected the contact table type for this demo. So here you can see, I can manage these views, the sidebars, everything you can customize within Power Apps. But by default, from this context, I want to show two ways of interacting with your Power Automate flows from this app and kind of extending this app to have more automation. So we have a built-in flow menu from this experience. So for any selected records, this flow menu, oops, sorry, I've lost my assignment context. I'll show that over here. Sorry, from this flow menu, you can see any flows that you have that are related to this contact table entity. So here, I've already created one flow that has this context. But if you have a model-driven app and you want to easily publish a flow that anyone with access to this app can trigger, let me show the steps. So if you, from this experience, if you click Create a Flow, it brings you to a template. Using today, this trigger is only available in the Microsoft Dataverse Legacy connector. We're working on bringing this to the current Dataverse connector later this year. But you'll click through this template. You'll select the environment that you're using. Right now, it's just default as the current environment being used here. You would select the contacts table and add other steps that you want to run whenever anyone receives this context from the flow. So from these other steps, you would have all of the details of this contact entity available for use in other steps. And you can add other Dataverse actions, other connectors to run from that point. So just to show an example here, this export context flow, whenever one of these rows is selected, it's getting the forecast and just doing a basic list operation in Dataverse. This could be extended to, email a spreadsheet, take other actions from Dataverse, and so on. So let's say you've shared this app, you want to make sure that other folks can run this flow as well. This isn't just something you built for you, you want it to be available to your team. So if you find the Cloudflow you've created, you see I have a couple different sharing options here. If you share as co-owner, that's for folks you want to collaborate on the flow with. But if you're simply trying to share this flow in a way that other folks can run and use the same process, you want to go to run only users, add those people, or you can add a group. I believe this can be either an AAD group or a group team in Dataverse to ensure that those users have access. Anyone you add here will have the same experience. If that trigger is being used, they'll have the same experience here where just by using that trigger and having access to view and run that flow, they'll be able to trigger the flow from this context, just as you, as the owner of the flow, can. And just to show here, if you have Dataverse steps in the flow that you want to run with the connection of that other user, right, rather than your connection as the user that set up the flow, this is also the area where you can configure that. So you can say, for any Dataverse actions in the flow, any other connectors, when that user clicks run for the flow, you want it'll prompt them for their connections, and here I'm seeing my connections being used, but based on those other options I was showing from the flow management page, they'll see they'll be able to provide their own connections, and their connections will be used for any of the steps in the flow. The flip side of this was for any other automatic process where you want to take more automatic steps in the background. So maybe you have a guest check-in process, or you're managing volunteers or things, and when one of these is added, you want to take other steps in the background. The Dataverse trigger, when a row is added, modified, or deleted, lets you easily respond to any changes to any table in Dataverse. Let me pull up the definition for that one just to show an example. So here, this is again a simple example just to show these pieces, but here I'm showing anytime you add a contact, and this is saying anyone in the organization. I could also say if I select user, this is any contact that I myself have added. The parent-child business unit or business unit are scoping that to specific parts of my organization that I may have set up within Dataverse. An organization is anybody at all. Any rows that are added can trigger this flow. I can say I can add additional filters here if there's contacts that only meet certain names, or if you want to if you're processing new feedback items and you want to add a certain query here to say just ones with a certain name or other pieces, you can limit all of that from the trigger here. And I'll share a cheat sheet with some great examples of all the different syntax to use here, and making that easy to filter in the links right after this. So you can see whenever a contact is added, here I'm saying any contact that anyone else has added in this organization. But then I've selected this option here for run as. So run as is saying for the Dataverse actions in this flow, just like we were looking at this from the manually triggered, I can say myself as the flow and connection owner, the connection being used for this trigger. I want the other Dataverse actions in this flow to use that context. I can say the user who modified that context, if it's the change type modified, or modifying user is the user who added or modified on those pieces. I could also say the row owner if if there's a specific user in Dataverse that owns that account, owns that other data, and if other operations should be used in their context. So here, if I select modifying user, and I select this use invokers connection option, this is only for the Dataverse connector to let you choose which other Dataverse steps you want to be tied to this run as option. Then the other steps in this flow will use this user's identity. So if you had other steps sending email through Dataverse, adding other records in Dataverse, it would all be using their identity. So here, just to show when a new contact is added, maybe they're doing field work or some other pieces, and it's important for this contact entity to always have a snapshot of their current weather as they're working. So we can say get the current forecast, and then we're going to add that forecast as a note to that record in Dataverse. So just to show what that looks like, you can see for this John Doe record that I created a moment ago, you can see it just attaches this note that says current weather, sunny skies, high of 65 in Atlanta going through. So this is a simple example with the weather, but you could easily see how, if you're receiving an email, receiving other context, you can take in the context of that item coming in, perform other actions in Dataverse based on that, I've seen some great examples around using the new ChatGPT and OpenAPI endpoints to summarize different emails, things and coming in. So, when you're adding these other pieces or sending other pieces, you can summarize that content, and put that in a notification or other records that you're linking from here. Yeah, so that was showing mainly triggering a flow, how to share that with your organization. We just saw triggering a background flow using the when a row is added, modified, or deleted trigger, and tying that to other Dataverse steps and making sure you're still using the right connections that you intend to for that. There's a lot of other parts of the Dataverse connector that we can get into around different actions. But just in the interest of time, I will leave this excellent cheat sheet from Donnie Cahill as a reference. So this walks through every parameter of the Dataverse connector and has great examples. So, for example, all the different filter options as you're working with, all the different data types in Dataverse, and you're filtering rows coming in or listing rows. This syntax is needed currently to send, pass these filters on to Dataverse. And this cheat sheet has a bunch of great examples that make that, really easy to refer to anytime you are working with files, rows, relating other records, those other pieces. And I'll include the links as well to this level up browser extension. So this makes it really easy. Anytime you are looking at a contact record or any other, just viewing the form for this row in Dataverse, it shows you the internal names. So job title has a display name, and then in Dataverse, if you were managing the schema for this, I'll also show within the Power Apps experience, the tables view for contact, you can see how I can manage the schema for this entity. And this is the same place you go if you were creating or modifying other custom entities. I can see a preview of the data here. I can modify the forms. That's where I just was to see that one, the view of one contact. The view was seeing the list page and those layouts for multiple contacts. All that can be managed here. And you can see, especially when you're working with flows, these shortcuts here for copying the schema name, copying the logical name have been added recently that make it really easy to preview the raw metadata for this table, so you can confirm exactly which names as you're building different integrations need to be used, both for the table definition, the column names and other pieces, and for pulling sample data for this table. So anytime you're working with new custom integrations in Dataverse, sometimes it can be helpful to check, make sure you're working with the right internal properties in those pieces from this view, from the Power Apps tables table browser. Yeah, so I mentioned the Level Up extension, the Dataverse cheat sheet, and XRM Toolbox, another tool that makes it easy, more than just seeing the syntax for things. It has more tools around browsing your tables, creating custom, customizing attributes and things in different ways that are, some handy shortcuts that aren't always available directly from the interface today. So sorry, I know that was a very general overview for some of these pieces of Dataverse, but I hope these resources are new and useful to some of you. Jocelyn, are we okay? I have 2 more slides I can cover, or we can jump to any questions from the group.
Matt, there was a question from Karsten that seems to be related to the thing that you were just showing, the copy X capabilities. Karsten, do you want to jump off mute and...
Yeah, it's certainly something which makes it more reliable to remember the schema name, for instance, and do stuff like this. But it certainly would be even more easier not to go into this experience and leave the other experience. So it would be great to see an improvement in the Dataverse itself, and in terms of select columns, to not really selecting columns in terms of a comma separated, make it really a drop-down mark and drill into the table schema.
Yes,
we
sorry,
have it for other
I should have led with that from our roadmap perspective. So we are looking at making it possible to directly select columns, have a more advanced expression builder where you don't need to use the OData syntax. You can use the same, when you're customizing a view in Dataverse, using a very similar interface to, just add the attributes you want to filter on and save that into the flow. The major improvements we're working on right now are making it possible to connect to other environments from this connector, as well as bringing in this when a row is selected trigger to the latest connector for consistency with all these other pieces, as well as some of the tools to make it easy to migrate from the older versions of the Dataverse connector for folks that have older flows or other integrations running with those older connectors. But yes, these usability pieces around selecting columns, filter rows, these are all pieces that we want to improve. And today, the OpenAPI integration from this part of Power Automate is a separate set of actions. But there's other places where we want to improve the Copilot experience directly within Dataverse and other places as well to save effort and save the need to go copy and parse the schema for here as well. So I guess yeah, I would encourage everyone to take this as a base for working with Dataverse. We're definitely looking to improve a lot of these areas further, but yeah, between these tools and these capabilities that are here, and these new the OpenAPI independent publisher connector and the other integrations coming up. Looking forward to see what you all create and hear your feedback on other areas that this can be streamlined. And sorry, I can't see the chat right now, so if there's any other questions on that or other questions, please feel free to chime in or.
A lot of
John?
people asking for the link to the cheat sheet, but then they found it online.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have pasted those in directly.
No worries.
Yeah.
I added the links to the documentation that you were referring to as you were referring to it as well. Let me just keep seeing.
And then Karsten had another question. Karsten, do you want to come off and ask that? So when running flows in the context of Dataverse, do you want to ask that?
Yeah, it's surely it's something around the running as a service principle, and when you're dealing with these kind of things, running into multiplexing issues. So I know that we have a kind of a undocumented area here, and it would be great to find more public documents which are talking about the fact when it is best to use which kind of connectivity. Should I use it in context of the user? Should I use it in context of the service principal? And if so, when do I need to make sure not to run into any kind of multiplexing licensing issues?
Definitely. So yes, the current guidance around multiplexing is very much around ensuring that each of the users managing or benefiting involved in the Cloudflow do have a individual per user license if they're using these premium capabilities for advanced connectors, or sorry, premium connectors, including the Dataverse connector in their flows. But definitely, we're working on a guide for scaling Dataverse usage. Anytime you're working with higher volume amount of data, and that'll include some of the steps around service principal interactions, as well as patterns for making batch or bulk calls, or working with some of those other pieces. So yeah, we'll have that added to the public documentation soon. Definitely want to make sure that those steps are clear for folks working with larger data sets and that kind of thing as well.
I've got another question about a weirdly named thing. When you're doing run only and you're setting a flow up for run only, you end up having to create a mail-enabled security group in Exchange. Then you have to go into the Dataverse, and then you got to go to the thing called Teams, and then you've got to make a pretend team up that references the other team that you just enabled in the mail-enabled security group. It does work, and it means then you do all your admin at the Exchange end of the system. Is there any way of making it slightly more seamless so that you don't actually have to create a team and you can actually just recognize that it's a mail-enabled security group? I know this is one of those weird licensing things that you're putting a team inside the Dataverse, which gets confusing when you talk about teams in Microsoft. But the question we've got on this is that it does work, but it just seems a little bit counterintuitive that you have to do it in 2 places to get something else to work.
Definitely.
'Cause we-
I know there's a number of parts where we want to make sure that things sync back to AD when possible. But yeah, right now the steps to create a group team in Dataverse where that's not automatically done does require managing it in both places. So yeah, I don't know of any short-term improvement that changes that, but that's definitely a pain point that we recognize as well with keeping AD and Dataverse in sync and making sure that when you share and when you're managing these flows, right, you don't need to go create a bunch of other identities just to do basic management pieces, right? And yeah, the less overhead there, the better, right?
Okay, that's great.
Chris, I'm not sure if you had any other comments on that piece around service principal use, or like where the group teams or things are being used with that.
I don't.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions on the Dataverse connector or other pieces? I guess or I guess any other yeah, any requests that you'd like to see? Any like we talked about the usability pieces and other pieces around making it easier to manage service principals and group teams with Dataverse. Curious if folks have other pieces they'd like to see improved.
The only one I'd like to see improved is the workaround for getting trigger locking to work. You put your when a row is changed, and if you don't work out how to do trigger locking, you're going to get infinite looping. So you want flow not to run if another column is in a set state, but you then have to put in a filter array action after that step just to build the logic to go back into the settings trigger in the actual Dataverse step. It's the same in SharePoint. That could be made a little bit easier, because that until somebody shows you is a whole big bunch of black magic. You just don't know what it does and whether it requires values or it just requires an actual event of things. But
yep.
So.
Yeah, so I can speak to one area we want to improve that is making it easier to use. In Dataverse, it's called the pre-image of the change that comes through. So when you have a record changing, we want to make it easy to respond, like query on meaningful changes from what the record was to what it's changed to, which can make it possible to have more scope triggers, avoid infinite loops between states you don't intend. So I think that's the main piece we have around infinite loops, around more scoped triggers that may help with that as well. But definitely, yeah, right now we have a warning that'll appear if you have a table referring to itself later in the flow, but that's I know that's very general. It's just a hint that may happen, but what you're looking for is just making sure that you can scope those pieces, right?
Yeah, the reason this came up was we recently moved a lot of stuff from SharePoint over to Dataverse, and we still find the same issue, is that you modularize your flow. So instead of having one super complicated flow, you've got 3 flows that do 3 different things when the data is in a different state in the same table. But because they're all looking at the same table, you end up trigger locking on an admin column that you've put in that says, all right, when the first action happens, change that column to new. All right, and then the second flow sits and looks at that table and goes, has that row changed? Oh, it's changed, and doesn't even start because it goes, I'm waiting for it to say updated, which happens at the end of another flow, we say. And that's where the trigger locking comes in really useful. But it was just to make it easier to find the values, is the point we're making.
Definitely, yeah. We'll definitely look into how we can make that a little bit smoother. Avoiding yeah, we know whenever you have many flows triggering on the same pieces as well, we know it can get kind of hard to see the the whole layout of everything tied to that data, tied to the same tables and things as well. So there's other improvements we want to make that that easier as well.
Right. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have any other comments, I think Jocelyn, you shared my LinkedIn. Feel free to ping through the this community area. I think Jocelyn and I and the Power Automate PM team monitor the Power Automate community. So please feel free to use the ideas and other parts of the Power Automate community forum for any other questions or sharing things you've made. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Jocelyn, were there any other things on the agenda?
That about concludes today, but thank you so much for coming, Matt. I hope that we enjoyed learning more about the Dataverse connector. and that we had a good session. As always, please reach out to me if you guys have any other questions. You guys know I see my LinkedIn and my Twitter. And I look forward to see you guys next month. This is always at 7 a.m. Pacific time, the second Wednesday of every month.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.